252. Denise Taylor, would you give the invitation, please?
News.
Would be my honor. Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing us all here today to do the work of the Cherokee people. We pray that you will be with us as we make decisions that will be in the best interest for the Cherokee Nation. Pray that you will keep your hand of protection over our service members as they fight for the freedoms that we enjoy. Be with us as we leave this place to bring us all back here safely again. For it's in your name I pray. Amen. Amen.
Here.
Leo Smith.
Here.
Steve Austin.
Here.
Harley Buzzard.
Here.
Joe Bird.
Honey.
Julia Coates. Sean Crittenden.
Honey.
Joe Deere. Mike Dobbins.
Here.
Kate Lumpkin. Darrell Legg.
Here.
Wes Snowfire.
Honey.
Dora Kutzkowski.
Here.
Mike Shambaugh.
Here.
Mary Bakersfield.
Honey.
Denise Taylor.
Here.
Victoria West. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Need approval of the minutes from September 14th.
Second.
Motion to second. All in favor?
Aye.
Reports, Management Resources, Mr. David Moore.
Good afternoon. Hope you all are doing well. Can you hear me, Brian?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Okay. I know you'll have a report in front of y'all. I'd just like to start off with a few highlights and stuff and then answer any questions that I can, or I will get you an answer. Our departments are just like everybody else's in the nation. We all continue to work with a reduced staff, but the needs seem to be going up, increasing on us, but everybody's putting on different hats and getting the job done and helping our citizens out. I personally would like to say thank you to all of our working men and women through all departments because they have stepped up and have been doing so for 6 or 7 months now. The bison, we have about 168 total head right now, and we've applied for 25 of the surplus bison, and haven't heard anything on that yet. Over on the CARES Act project, you'll have, it says 6 of the 9 buildings are under construction. Today, there is, all 9 of them are under construction, plus 2 more have started also. So we're well underway to meet the December 30th deadline on those days. That's the main highlights I have. If you want to answer any questions, I can for you guys.
Okay. Joe?
Hey David, I got 2 things to ask you if you can look at. The first one where we did that groundbreaking in the Catoosa Tag Agency, is there a way we get some kind of safety fence on the outer side of that due to people parking out there and dumping their trash to get them sort of off of that grounds where those rocks are? The second thing is the lights at the new JW Sand building we purchased are off
Yes.
and it's subject to vandalism because it's completely dark.
Yeah, we have the wall packs lit up. There's a wire broke. We're trying to get an outside contractor to come in, and you're going to have to pull a new wire to the parking lot lights. But we do have lights on the building and under the canopy that are power cut. And at the tag office up there, we have those boulders that are in place trying to keep those people from going in there and parking and trashing the place up. But we will control access to that whenever we get the tag office up there.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I might add to that, I will note that some of that said Joe Deere was here on some of that.
It's a campaign, okay?
Yeah. So in relation to the JWSAM, we've been looking at some of the engineering and field reports and things that we're getting ready to do out there. And so you should start to see some work move out there pretty quickly to address some of the issues with the parking lot. There's some resurfacing that needs to go on out there. So we'll make sure that with that third-party contractors, we start to go out and address that stuff. While we got the parking lot under repair, we'll double-check everything to make sure, but you should start to see some pretty significant work going on out there pretty soon.
All right, cool, thank you.
You bet.
Any other questions for Mr. Moore? David, you did good. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Next up be Real Estate Services, Ms. Ginger Reeves.
Hi there. Good afternoon.
No.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. If you have a copy of my monthly report, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to address them.
Anyone have any questions for Ginger?
I have a comment. Okay. Ginger, you're aware of the mural there at Oak Hill?
Yes.
They just removed it. So I hope it's in good hands and it's returned back to the rightful owners and community.
That's my understanding. I know C&D has worked very hard since May of 2019 to get their experts in to evaluate if it actually could be moved and to restore it, and I'm sure that it is in good hands.
Okay. Do you know how long they will have it before they return it back to the community?
I do not. I can find out for you and get back with you.
Okay, would you please? Thank you, madam.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Any other questions for Ginger? Did a good job, thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, environmental programs will be Mr. Tom Elkins. Chad, you got it?
Good afternoon, can you hear me?
Yes.
Tom?
Tom Elkins has forwarded his report, and I can take any questions that you may have on that.
Anybody have any questions for the environmental programs? No, you go ahead with yours.
All right, well, I'm going to move into a couple of talking points I'd like to address on the front of my report here, and then maybe end with some conversation on safety based on some of the interest and questions that I've received over the last week or so. I always like to get an update of the landfill every month. It's been a smooth operations, it's been quiet, and that's a good thing. We'll always take that at the landfill. It's a pretty big operation that we run, and everything's looking great. As far as the master plan that I discussed in detail last month, we've continued to work with our outside engineering firm, offering additional details and data about what the strategic planning is going to be over the life of the operation. And we've reached some pretty crucial data points that we've been submitting that are really going to help paint the picture of what our options are going forward. I don't have anything specific to report. It's going to be based in large part over crunching the numbers and really digging deep into that analysis. So I'll keep this body posted as we get additional concrete information. It could take several months for us to get to that place, but we're still diligently working on it and have plenty of grant funds available still at this time to proceed with that work. But one thing I did want to point out, and I mentioned this at the last meeting, we are going to have to raise rates on most, if not all, of our commercial customers. We've already implemented some of those rate changes. We don't know what the actual break point is going to be until we get our report done, but we do know that some of our pricing is a little bit low. So we've already started the process of changing those rates for commercial-only customers and are now going to proceed with conversations for our municipal customers. I think, obviously anytime you increase rates, it's not going to be well received, but it's still going to, maintain a competitive pricing for our purposes, which, is good when you're comparing against other landfills in the region. So I don't think we're going to lose any customers, which, speaks to the fairness of the rates that we propose, but, that's certainly something that's probably going to be coming your way from time to time in the form of complaints. And it's not anything unreasonable. It just corrects maybe some of the lower prices that we've had before we really had engineering analysis, really kind of dig down on that. So everything at the landfill is running smooth, and hopefully I'll have some more concrete information as to future plans as we go along here over the next several months. One of the things I also wanted to touch on is our ongoing EV project. We just started construction this month at a charging station in Stillwell, finalized plans for a charging station here in Tahlequah near the casino for our electric buses. We have received electric buses here on site. They are ready to go to the one final finishing process in Tulsa. And then we'll have a training component, and then hopefully very soon we'll be able to implement those into our transit system. As of now, we plan to supplement public transit in the still the West Island Springs area and the Tahlequah to Catoosa area, or at least near there where it connects with other public transit systems. That's going to help make it a complete loop. Moving forward, we should have everything ready to go and announce on that within the next, I would say, 2 months. And we're very excited about that project. It's going to be the first of its kind in Indian country, and frankly, the first of its kind in a rural community across the country. We also have additional funding that we've been receiving for some time from the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust for other EV expansions. We're moving forward with finalizing what the development's going to be, looking for other areas where we can spend that money consistent with the requirements of the trust. And so it's a big project. There's several $million there that's going to really highlight our electric vehicle initiative here in the next year or so, 2 years. One of the things you probably also have seen is some announcements on our Sustainable Communities Initiative. We completed the first 2 pilot solar projects under the Housing, Jobs, and Sustainable Communities Act. There were no major hiccups on the construction side, and we look forward to monitoring the energy savings for those 2 systems to compare for future funding and for projects as we go into this fiscal year and the next. These are great projects, and they yield many benefits for these communities over 25 years, and a lot of savings that it'll help go a long way for these communities that don't have a whole lot of discretionary money. The other issue I wanted to touch on, which a number of you have reached out to me about safety. It's the outgrowth of the McGirt decision. It's been a point of conversation over the last few months at the Tribal Council. It's a very complicated issue, and I think if I may, I'd like to spend just a couple minutes explaining, what safety is, how environmental programs work, so that way we can understand the exact implications of what this means as it impacts the Cherokee Nation. So to put it into context, environmental programs across the country generally work like this. The federal government adopts and passes various federal laws that relate to human health and the environment and regulatory standards. An example of that would be, Safe Drinking Water Act, requirements for water quality, air quality requirements for clean air. Once they're adopted into federal law, they apply generally throughout the United States, whether it be reservation land, whether it be state land, and it's generally the regulatory standard by which all industry and individual consumers and folks like you and me have to follow. So after those programs are created, there's a delegation option to each individual state that gives them the ability to implement those programs within their jurisdiction, so long as they meet the minimum quality and regulatory requirements of the federal law. That's usually accompanied with substantial funding from the federal government and technical expertise to help them implement the spirit and letter of the law. On reservations, however, that delegation is usually made available to tribes through what's called a treatment as state delegation, where essentially a reservation has the same enforcement and regulatory ability as a state would, so long as the EPA approves it, and so long as it likewise complies with what the minimum requirements for quality standards are applied throughout the reservation boundaries. This is a standard that applies to generally all reservations across the country, and it's been a long-standing policy of the EPA. There's formal guidance that was adopted back in 1984 that requires the EPA to take certain actions to help tribes build capacity and help tribes enforce those programs within the reservation boundaries. So the issue that is before us now is back in 2005, we had what was known as the Safety Rider. Now, Safety is a federal law that is generally passed annually to provide funding for the nation's transportation programs. And And I would point out that the formal name of that is the Safe, Accountable, Flexible, Efficient Transportation Equity Act, which, as I've learned, any federal law that has that many fluffy adjectives in it should probably be suspect, and I think in this case it certainly is. But back in 2005, there was a specific rider that was submitted into that year's passage of the bill by a prominent senator here in the United States. It didn't go through committee. It wasn't something subject to debate. And that particular rider applied only to Oklahoma tribes, and it does two things. First, it requires any treatment of state delegation for a reservation in Oklahoma, which is what we discussed as what is generally the standard across the country. In order for that treatment of state delegation by the EPA, which normally the EPA has the sole authority on whether or not that should be granted, such a request has to be accompanied by an approval by the state. So, for example, a reservation in Oklahoma, which, the common understanding of that has changed a little bit in the post-McGirt world, require that in order for us to receive treatment of state to administer those programs, we would have to have the state's approval. The other thing it does is it provides or purports to provide a pathway for the state of Oklahoma to assume regulatory jurisdiction over reservation lands or all of Indian country within the state of Oklahoma. Again, this is something that only applies to Oklahoma tribes. It's somewhat unique, and it's something that we've been aware of for 15 years, and it's something that the Cherokee Nation, along with other tribes, have pretty aggressively opposed any effort or attempt by the state to exercise or activate that piece. There's been a couple of instances where that's happened, where the conversation at least has been elevated, but it's always been staved off through tribal opposition. The issue that we have is following the recent McGirt decision. One of the first actions that the state took was to request the EPA to approve or activate safety as it applies to Indian country within Oklahoma. Now, Indian country was defined by the McGirt case to be the entirety, at least for the Muscogee Creek Nation and by extension the Cherokee Nation, the original treaty boundaries for each of those tribes within Oklahoma. So technically at that time, the general policy of the EPA delegating treatment of state authority to tribes would have applied to the tribes. Because of safety, in the request to activate that, they've essentially, at least their effort or intent was to revert that back to the status quo pre-McGirt on account of them excluding specifically trust and restricted property. Now, under the law, they would have had an argument at least to extend their jurisdiction into trust and restricted property, but they didn't do that in this instance. And it largely, at least from the state's perspective, returns things back to the way it would have been before McGirt, but also very much so treats the Cherokee Nation and all Oklahoma tribes, frankly, in equity as compared to tribes across the state. The EPA sent out notification to us that they were evaluating the state's request, and then subsequently that they intended to approve the state's request, at which time, we sent a pretty strong objection letter with supporting documents saying, we don't think this is appropriate for reasons why. We think that consultation needs to be ongoing here due to the sweeping changes that touch on, unknown impacts in a particular unique situation in Oklahoma with McGirt and the state's historic jurisdictional efforts in those areas. Requested consultation and did have 2 consultation sessions with them that were quite lengthy and quite detailed, registering that objection and asking for more time to discuss it and really walk through what that means. In those conversations, the state they really relied heavily on a particular section of the law that in safety that obviously attempted to remove any barrier that the tribes might try to raise to the state's request to activate that and the EPA's approval of it. The legislative intent in that section is pretty clear, even though I think it's pretty inartfully drafted. But it does, it does purport to give the state authority, and that's what the state has requested, and the EPA had approved it. I think that the consultation process was disappointing, but it's nevertheless, where we are. So what are we doing now, and where are we going? Obviously, this is not a positive development for India, and it's not a positive development for tribal settlements within Oklahoma. We've reached out to, our counterparts. We've put together somewhat of a work group, and we've had a number of conversations about what this means going forward. We talked about it in depth at Intertribal this last week, and we've also had other offline conversations with our tribal partners to talk about what that means. We're still in the process of developing consensus going forward. It's a really complicated issue that touches on dozens of environmental programs, and so we're working through the technical aspects of what this means, and also considering what our options are on how we handle this issue with the state and how we handle this issue with the EPA. We're getting closer to building consensus on this. It's just there's a lot of parties involved. There's a lot of difference of opinion, and there's a lot of technical evaluation pieces that have to be done. So we're still diligently moving forward with that effort. One of the things I also wanted to mention is I know that there's a resolution floating around out there that is proposed to be on the Rules Committee this month. I've had a number of tribal councils reach out to me as to what thoughts are on that particular document. Some of the language in there I don't think is helpful to the conversation that we've been having with the other tribes and some of the other cooperative efforts that we have on projects with the state. But I proposed a substitute resolution for that I hope will be circulated to you folks soon, that I think will be a lot more manageable for the efforts that we have ongoing and some of the strategic planning that we have down the road. So I think if that document is circulated to you folks, I think that's something that we could probably support in the alternative to the document that's been previously circulated on your end. So with that being said, I know that was very much a 30,000-foot view and on a very technically complicated topic. So if you have any questions, I can take them at this time.
Sean?
Yeah. Chad, like the calls that we'll get will be kind of what you talked about there at the end. What does this mean? Kind of in plain English. And where's the nation going? So just as soon as you come up with that, that's the calls that I've already got, and I'm sure everybody else has, but that's what I'll be interested to get from you, kind of in a cliff note way. So just send that whenever you can. And also on the landfill, now when I think of commercial customers, I think of the factories bringing semi-loads of stuff, big money people, but that also covers like your mom and pop trash services. Am I right there?
Yeah, it will. It's really going to depend on the amount of trash that they bring, right? So in that community, that is the primary source for disposing of household waste for most everyone in the area, and it's a highly native populated community. And so what we've tried to do is tier our rate structure that passes along those costs to folks who come in with tons of trash as compared to individuals who have less than that. So for example, if a family, or say a small group of families were to collect their own trash and deliver once a week, the threshold by which increased fees are going to be assessed is going to be pretty high. It's going to be a pretty substantial cleanup job, and there's going to be quite a bit of trash that's going to be required to trigger an increased cost for those particular people.
Yeah, the family, excuse me just a second. Just the families bringing their trash. Give me an idea what that looks like right now. Because that's going to be the cause that for sure Canaan and I, probably Sequoia County right next door, and I cut different one. So right now, just the one family truckload, let's say. What's the price right now? You know, it depends on the weight of the trash. I mean, a truckload of metal or whatever, but how much, what my people are gonna be worried about is what's that increase on the low man there, like dollar wise, can you ballpark?
So we're actually not increasing the rates on individual families, I believe, and I want to say that the amount is less than 1,000 pounds of trash. So if you fill the back of your truck up with household waste, and perhaps even a small trailer, I think that you should be able to, I guess not having anything, inordinately heavy in there, that you should be able to get through for the same price that we've been charging up to this.
Right. Now, in the middle level, like these mom and pop trash services, they go through a few neighborhoods and, considered commercial, okay, but they also, a lot of them also live there. And it kind of ties into the landfill being a service. Even these guys making a little money, these trash guys that Kanan and I know, a lot of us know, they are making a little money, but they're helping with the service, they're helping with the environment. Is that going to be taken into account? Kind of, let's say the middle guys there, not necessarily the family, not some big factory from Arkansas bringing all their stuff. Can we take that into account of these, local trash services?
Sure. Absolutely. We tried to find the most fair way that we could to implement increased pricing for the community. I think that when you consider these individuals that go and they run a commercial operation to collect trash from and for a monthly fee from individuals, they're not able to take that trash anywhere else without paying substantially more. And so where we had to kind of draw the line is if you're an individual family or a small collection of families and you're doing some, a little bit of spring cleaning or you're doing routine trash disposal, I mean, those are the ones that price increases affect the most. But whenever you have an individual that runs a commercial operation picking up trash from a number of households or a number of neighborhoods, I mean, that's a commercial operation. And that's a substantial cost to us whenever we accept that trash in terms of our depleting our airspace and the life of the cell. The landfill operates at a substantial loss every year. And one of the things that we're trying to do is to bridge that gap to get to a break even. I don't think that, the immediate expectation is that the landfill is going to be profitable. We do recognize the value that it has to that community and that, its proximity to other landfills is not easy. The closest one is in Chalasaw or Taneytown or Muskogee. But at some point we have to minimize the losses that we realize by commercial operations, and I think that if it's a pretty large or mid-sized commercial operations, the price increases are going to be subject to those. And at this point, those individuals have already been paying them, and we have not received a whole lot of negative feedback.
Is there any distinction between the big companies and those lower trash guys like we're talking about? Just the local, is it just going to be one rate for all commercial? What it's going to boil down to is our constituents, some of you guys' constituents, what are they going to do when you raise the rates? They're going to raise the rates on my people. So I want to be careful with that. And I'd like to see some kind of dollar, just how that's going to affect us, because, Kanan and I for sure, because it's right there, boom. That's why I'm showing some interest in it, because
Sure.
I sure want it in the back of your mind, commercial sounds big, but there's some just good old boys doing that trash service. I know they're making money, but I want to have a clear distinction between them and, I don't want to name company names, but there's a difference there, because those big commercial people, they're not going to pass their what they're getting hit with on to our people. So just keep us in the loop on that if you would, Chad, and before you stamp it, the prices, I'd like to at least see it and have 2 cents worth, and I'm sure my buddy over there would too, and probably all of us.
Absolutely. Maybe when I come back next month to report, I could bring some real life examples that might help.
Yeah, that'll help me.
Yeah, paint a better picture of what this means, so that way we're all on the same page. And we always try to be thoughtful about what the impacts that we make out of the changes that we make out of the landfill, what that means to the local area residents and individual Cherokees. But I mean, we do have to also be mindful of the cost, and so that's the delicate needle that we're trying to thread. So maybe I'll come back with specific examples and trends that might be a little helpful to explain that situation.
And what might help too is whoever we're paying, this outside entity, to come up with the plan. What might help us feel better about some of this stuff, because it's been a service for so long. We all know how much money they've been making. And I know we're trying to better that, but if we knew the plan that them big boys are coming up with, it might help us feel better about, what people are going to be paying more. So yeah, just keep us in the loop and know that I'm just going to speak for this table, and I'm highly interested in how that's going to affect Adair County. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Dear, do you have a question?
No.
Theo?
Yes, what he's talking about is we're talking about these guys running around the pickup truck. It's got the chain link fence holding up the sideboards. It'll really affect them. If we do raise it, I'd like to at least give them 60 days notice and just not spring that on them real fast, because, especially around the lake areas where the big trucks don't go, those people go up in there and they're, not have a deal. But if we could just give them plenty of notice, just not spring it on.
Of course, and I would say that, we've already raised the gate rate, which is what most of these individuals pay, some time ago, and we gave, I think it was a 60 or 90 day notice period, I can't remember, but it was a substantial amount of time. And the increase that we had was considerably reasonable, since everyone was pretty aware that the cost that they were paying here was pretty favorable in terms of being able to drive to Salisaw, and we haven't had a whole lot of the way of complaints. One of the things that we're also going to try to do is implement long-term contracting with these individuals that might be able to bring a price break and also help us maintain and project consistency over the weeks. But we certainly would not spring that on anyone, and on the changes we have made that impacts most of those people, there just wasn't much pushback. So yes, sir.
Appreciate that. One more thing, on the Lower Illinois meetings, are they not inviting the Cherokee Nation to any of those meetings?
What do you mean by Lower Illinois meetings?
Well, when the state and the Corps have those meetings, talk about what they're gonna do with the water tip and the levels and all that, we never have anybody there. Are they not inviting us?
I have not received a formal request, but I will find out more about where these individuals are meeting and see if we can be a part of that conversation. It certainly is something of interest and relevance to us. So yes, sir, I'll double check on that.
Now, if y'all go, if you would, let me go with you. So holler at me.
That sounds great.
Thank you.
Dr. Baldwin?
You may have to go with you, Chad. 2 or 3 weeks ago, when AG Barr was here on site, were there any discussions then about the role of the EPA here in a post-McGirt world? Were there any discussions about the EPA with AG Barr?
Not that I'm aware of, and not to my knowledge. The Attorney General doesn't really have a whole lot of engagement in EPA or environmental regulation. Most of that stuff is handled internally by the EPA, and when there are problems or enforcement actions, they're generally handled in the form of the solicitor's office on a civil case. So I'm not sure that he was aware of that situation, and it wasn't something that I spoke with him about generally, not something that he would normally opine in that space about.
Okay, thank you, Chad.
So, I guess the governor's office contacted the EPA and basically got this agreement set up. Is that how it went down?
Yes.
So, yeah, the law allows the EPA to submit an application to activate that particular, the law allows the state of Oklahoma to submit an application to activate that particular provision of the law. There's not a process that's been fully defined in that law. As I mentioned earlier, it's not very well drafted, and that tends to happen when you're slipping in somewhat sneaky riders into a larger piece of legislation. But yes, he submitted an application to the state to assume that jurisdiction very shortly after the McGirt case was decided to the EPA, and the EPA set about a consultation process with tribes, albeit one that I believe was inefficient or insufficient for the nature of the change that was being proposed. And the EPA made it very clear that based on their interpretation of the law, they were obligated to approve it with some speed, and they did.
So basically, this gives the state the right to regulate lands that they don't own.
So the state generally has, the police power and regulatory power over. So let's talk about what it was prior to McGirt. Prior to the McGirt decision, the state had lawful authority to regulate all land within the state, with the exception of trust and restricted property that was self-regulated by the tribe. Whenever the McGirt decision was handed down, it changed the definition of what Indian country is. Well, it didn't change the definition, but it applied the definition of Indian country to the full interior of the reservation boundaries of the Cherokee Nation. Well, of the Muskogee Creek Nation, and by extension, the Cherokee Nation. What that means then is the current EPA law treats Indian country differently than it does other lands, which would be lands not held in trust or restricted property. So because of that, there was a deference that the EPA would be the sole authority to regulate environmental quality within the 14 counties of the Cherokee Nation by reason of it being defined Indian country under the existing law. So it never contemplated the EPA Indian policy that's existed for some, 20, 30 years, never envisioned that Oklahoma would have reservation status for the 5 tribes. It didn't contemplate that. But nevertheless, that was the policy and the law of the EPA. And so when the Supreme Court reaffirmed the McGirt that was in fact the case, it automatically created a presumption of exclusive jurisdiction with the EPA for all of the interior boundaries of the reservations. With the activation of safety, it basically returns back to the state jurisdiction over all lands that are not otherwise fee or trust, which was the status quo and was how the default operation prior to the McGirt case being decided. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
it's a kind of complicated jurisdictional exercise here, so I'm trying to explain it the best way I can.
So this basically is a federal mandate, not a state mandate.
Yeah. Congressional.
It is congressional?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
This was a congressional mandate, right? If
It came
the
from
law was,
Congress, or is this a state mandate, or what kind of mandate is this?
So it's a federal law that provided or purported to provide the safety exception for Oklahoma. So the federal law passed by the United States Congress, which, as you know, Congress has plenary authority to pass legislation that impacts, tribal operations and tribal land. And this was a rider attached to a federal spending bill that applied specifically to Oklahoma, that gave the state of Oklahoma those particular rights within the state only.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for Chad?
So we're the only state that has to be confined to that legislation by Congress. That was a sneaky move back in '05 with that midnight rider that affects the tribes in Oklahoma, correct?
Correct. It only applies to Oklahoma tribes, and that's been a big part of, the objections and commentary that we've submitted to the EPA. This is not appropriate, consistent with the way tribes have been treated historically, consistent with our treaties, and consistent with the policy that's been applicable. And so, yes, I agree with that. And it was very sneaky, and it's something that we've been really angry about for 15 years, and
Well, we should be in good shape because our governor is a tribal member, correct?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So this will, basically this trumps the Oklahoma Enabling Act. In a nutshell, it does. Because the Oklahoma Enabling Act says they can't do this.
I don't know about that.
I'm sorry, I was having a little bit of a hard time hearing. Are we saying the Oklahoma Enabling Act?
What does this trump the Oklahoma Enabling Act? Because the Oklahoma Enabling Act talks about the rights of the tribes and that you can't infringe upon those rights. That no state
Sure.
can do that.
You know, I think from a legal perspective, you know, that's a valid point that you raise, and it's one that we've certainly been discussing. But one of the things that is almost universally true in Indian law is that the federal government has plenary authority to change the legal standards that apply to tribes, tribal citizens, and tribal lands. It's one of the bedrock principles of federal Indian law that has brought about the ability of the United States government to force changes upon tribes that they don't necessarily appreciate. So, you know, I do think that the Enabling Act is not necessarily the constitutional restriction against the state, but the federal law that's applicable in safety purports to give the state that authority. And despite the fact that I have some disagreement as to the specific language in there, the specific process that was used, I think if that does hold true, then I would believe the answer to that would be yes. They would have that authority.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Chad? Thank you, sir. You done good.
Thank you.
Old business done pending, new business done pending. Announcements? Our next meeting will be Monday, November the 16th.
Motion to
Just need a
adjourn.
motion.
Second.
The motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.